Hey guys, Mrs. Carraz here. Today we're looking at Chapter 20, Section 3, the United States and Latin America. This is the last section of this chapter, so let's dive in. Alright, so at this time, if American ships wanted to travel from the Atlantic to the Pacific, they had to go around South America. And this was obviously ridiculously time-consuming. It's a giant landmass to travel around. So people wanted a faster way to travel between these two bodies of water. And Theodore Roosevelt thought that the best idea was to build a canal connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific. And canal is a man-made waterway that works with a system of locks. We'll see an image of it shortly, or you'll be able to see a video of it shortly. Roosevelt thinks that if we do this, A, it's going to improve global shipping speed. We can get things from point A to point B faster, right? He also thought it would make it easier for the U.S. Navy to defend our overseas empire, which we're now building, right? So the Isthmus of Panama, which at this time was under Colombian control, so anytime I say Panamanians, they are under the government of Colombia. The Isthmus of Panama was chosen as the location. An isthmus is a narrow strip of land that joins two larger areas of land. The Isthmus of Panama is located between Mexico and South America, and it's only 50 miles wide. So if we could cut through this, make it a waterway, that's going to save us so much time and energy in the long term when we're shipping things. So this is where Roosevelt wants to see the canal built. So the U.S., to make this a reality, offers $10 million cash to the Panamanian/Colombian government up front to build a canal. We said we'll give you $10 million now, and we're going to give you $250,000 a year so that we're allowed to keep using it. The government is questioning this move. So first, right, people think that if they agree to this, really the U.S. is getting permanent control over a 6-mile wide stretch of Colombian territory. And this land is, like I said, controlled by the Colombian government, who is in charge of Panama. The government felt that the rights to this land were worth more than the U.S. had offered. So the Colombian government says, no thank you, we're not going to build a canal with you. But lucky for us, Panamanians at this time were unhappy under Colombian rule. So Roosevelt secretly tells these rebel forces in Panama that if they want to, claim independence, the U.S. will support them. And what do you know? The rebels take Roosevelt up on this offer. They revolt against the Colombian government in 1903. The U.S. sends Marines and gunboats to help the rebels. And as soon as Panama says it's an independent nation that is no longer under Colombian rule, we say, we acknowledge your independence. Yeah, you are. Great for you, Panama. If Panama is an independent nation, they can make their own treaties with other nations. So they were able, the now Panamanian government, which is not under Colombian rule, sells us the land we want and allows us to build the canal for the original price we offered. I did not click. There it is. Alright, so in 1904, we actually begin building the canal, and we'll see that there are a lot of problems implicit in this. The first really big problem were the diseases in the area, particularly malaria and yellow fever, that were infecting many workers and making it very difficult to, produce in this area. So, William C. Gorgas, who is an American expert on tropical diseases, is brought in to focus on this problem. He works with other experts, and he figures out that these diseases are spread by mosquitoes, and mosquitoes like to live in damp areas with still water. So to cut back on the diseases, they've got to cut back on the mosquito population. So workers drained swamps, they cleared woodlands to really try to, destroy the habitats the mosquitoes like to live in. By 1906, this was pretty successful. The rate of disease drastically decreased in the area. So there are 3 major jobs implicit in building a canal. This is a video. I think if I click it, I will not be able to record, but you can go to this site if you want. So in order to build a canal, you have to cut through a mountain, you have to dam a river, and you have to build the canal's locks. That video will show you how those locks actually work. So the hardest part of this job was, digging through the mountains. Obviously, it's very physically strenuous. There are constant mudslides. The heat is unbearable. These things are causing real problems for the workers, and we'll look at this together in class. Another big problem that we'll look at is that most supervisors and engineers came from the U.S. Most of the people actually working on the canal came from Africa or the West Indies. And we're going to see how this racial and class divide really developed within the people, within the ranks of people who were working on the canal. Overall, over 6,000 people died building the canal. But great news, the canal opened 6 months ahead of schedule on August 13th, 1914. So moving past the canal into some different policies when it comes to our interactions with other nations. So Theodore Roosevelt loved the West African proverb that said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," right? He thought it was a great way to approach your interactions with other nations. You're going to approach other nations diplomatically first, and that's the speak softly part, right? We're going to be kind, we're going to try to be peaceful, we're going to try to, compromise with the nations around us. But if that doesn't work, if we can't get what we need that way, we're not going to hesitate to use military power, in this case that is the big stick, when diplomacy fails, right? And Roosevelt said that this policy was especially important when it came to protecting American interests, whether that's here in the continental United States or outside of the continental U.S., now that we're getting involved in other nations, as we've seen all throughout this chapter. So, in 1904, European nations wanted to use military force. This seems unrelated, but we'll get there. European nations wanted to use military force to get the Dominican Republic to pay back debts that were owed to those European nations. As part of Latin America, Roosevelt considered this U.S. territory, and I'm not saying territory as in we actually have possession of it, but like it's in our zone, right? And at this time, or previously, we had passed the Monroe Doctrine, and the Monroe Doctrine said that other nations shouldn't mess with Latin America, right? If you're messing with Latin America, you're messing with us, essentially. So at this time, Roosevelt passes a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, stating that if you're messing with the Latin America, you're messing with us, right? And that means we can defend our interests in Latin America by exercising international police power. A corollary is a logical extension of a doctrine or a proposition. So, Roosevelt said, if Latin America is technically under our scope, we can do what we need to do to defend it. It's only logical, right? So, when these European nations were trying to get their money back, Roosevelt did what he had to do. He sent Marines to the Dominican Republic to protect them from these European nations, and he took over the country's finances to try and help them get in a better position. And the Roosevelt corollary has been cited very often whenever we really want to interfere in Latin American affairs. This is our, permission that we've given ourselves. All right, so Taft, the president who came after Roosevelt, he was not all about this speak softly, big stick deal. He preferred something called dollar diplomacy. And the idea behind dollar diplomacy is that if we create economic ties to other nations, that's the best way to expand American influence, right? If I give you money and you start to know that I'm going to give you money and you start to need that money, well, guess what? You're going to be more likely to go along with whatever I tell you to do. That's kind of the idea. So Taft specifically wanted U.S. bankers to invest in Asia and Latin America. And like I just said, he thought the more dependent those areas were on American money, the more they're really willing to be under American control. Sounds well and good, I guess. But the problem is that's going to get our military involved more often than not, right? If we're investing money in, let's say the Dominican Republic again, that means, and the Dominican Republic tries to go to war with someone, our troops might need to be deployed to protect the money that we have invested there, right? So we're kind of seeing ourselves getting involved in other people's business. I can't imagine how this will lead to our next chapter, World War I. All right, so after Taft, Wilson ultimately comes into office, and his idea, his policy, is that the U.S. should support and nurture democracy throughout the world, right? He's not saying there's one right way to do it, but if we can in any way bring about more democracy in this great world of ours, we should do it, according to Wilson. So, interesting that this is his theory, because we've got a little situation in Mexico at this time. Porfirio Diaz was the dictator of Mexico at this time. In 1911, he gets overthrown. There's a Mexican Revolution where they're trying to really figure out what their new government is going to look like, and that takes place from 1911 to 1917. Wilson's hoping that that government is going to be a democracy, right? Especially because Mexico's our closest neighbors. We want to be on good terms with them. If we think alike, oh, how great. All right, so this is where it gets a little choppy. In 1914, we have some U.S. sailors in Mexico, and they get arrested. They ultimately get released, but Wilson sends the Navy down to Mexico. Somehow, while the Navy is down in Mexico, over 100 Mexicans are killed in the process, okay? So now we're seeing some serious tensions arising between the U.S. and Mexico, and war really seems imminent. Francisco Villa, who at this time is a Mexican rebel general, right? He leads a group of men into New Mexico, which is obviously a U.S. state, where they kill 18 Americans, okay? Now, Villa was a rebel, he was going against his government's orders, so the Mexican government doesn't want to be punished for Villa's actions. So they allow the U.S. to come into Mexico to try and track down Villa. Several thousand soldiers actually enter Mexico, but they don't find Villa, and after 11 months they leave. This seems like a pretty abrupt ending to the chapter, but like I said, the next chapter we look at is World War I, and this tension that we are feeling with Mexico and this uncertainty when it comes to our international policy will definitely play a big role as we move forward. So we are going to cut it there. Hope you guys have a great day. Bye.